Since the dawn of time, man has met challenges face on, doing things just to prove that he can. Climbing mountains because they're there, crossing seas to find out what lies beyond, traveling to space to meet our destiny, and throwing himself over a waterfall in a barrel because sometimes we just do stupid shit. Niagara Falls is a natural spectacle that attracts millions of tourists each year. Though nowhere near the tallest waterfall in the world, there being around 500 taller. The thing that stands out at these falls is the sheer amount of water going over. At its highest point on the Canadian side, the average drop is 188 feet or 57 meters. For comparison, Angel Falls in Venezuela has a drop of some 979 meters or 3,212 foot. The amount of raging water that cascades over Niagara Falls is much greater though, with some 1,416 tons of water crashing down every second. So, of course, your first thought would be, I bet if I go inside a rickety old barrel, I could survive going over that. Okay, maybe not, but thoughts along those lines entered the head of one Annie Edson Taylor at the dawn of the 20th century. Annie had her reasons, however. She had decided to go over the falls on her 63rd birthday and had lived quite the life up to that point. Born in Auburn, New York in 1838, Annie was one of 8 children. Her father passed away when she was just 12 years old, but left the family with enough money to live comfortably for a time. Annie studied to become a teacher, and during this time she met her husband, David Taylor. They married and had a child who sadly died in his infancy, with her husband also dying soon after. Widowed and alone, Annie drifted between towns and cities and various jobs before settling in Bay City, Michigan, where she hoped to become a dance instructor, eventually setting up her own dance school. She would also teach music before traveling to San Antonio, Texas, then on to Mexico City, looking for work after the dance school proved less popular than expected. She would arrive back in Bay City with a need and desire to financially secure her later years. She also wanted to help 2 of her friends who had fallen on hard times, and with the likes of death-defying showmen like Harry Houdini regularly pulling in huge crowds and big money, she quickly came up with a plan. She would go over the ferocious Niagara Falls in a barrel. She would be the first to attempt this stunt, but not the first to have gone over the falls. The first recorded instance of people going over comes from 1853, when 3 men who had been working on a boat and drinking attempted to row from Goat Island over to the mainland. Their boat capsized and 2 of the men went over the falls, with the 3rd, Joseph Avery, managing to grab hold of tree roots growing from a rock. He was able to weather the strong current for 18 hours. The next day, rescue attempts began, culminating in a boat being tethered to the nearby Goat Island Bridge and guided down to the stranded Avery. He was able to climb onto the boat, but it almost immediately capsized, flinging him into the waters and over the falls to his death. The falls would go on to claim many more lives, but more about that later. For Annie's attempt, she would have the protection of a specially made barrel constructed from oak and iron, with the inside padded with a mattress. Initially, she found it difficult to find support for her attempt, with people worried they could be helping with a potential suicide. To help prove to these doubters that the barrel was safe, a cat was placed inside and sent over the Horseshoe Falls 2 days before Annie's own attempt. The barrel survived, and despite, quite understandably, being rather shook up and with a cut to its head, so did the cat. Annie, posing with the barrel and pummeled puss a short while later. Soon enough, it was Annie's turn, and on October 24th, 1901, her 63rd birthday, the barrel was placed into the water from the side of a rowboat, and she climbed inside along with her lucky heart-shaped pillow. The lid was screwed down and a bicycle pump was used to compress the air in the barrel, with the hole for that then being plugged with a cork. Then Annie was set adrift near the American shore south of Goat Island, with the current carrying her towards and over the Canadian Horseshoe Falls. A short while later, the barrel was found and, all in, the stunt had taken less than 20 minutes. Inside was a relieved Annie Taylor, shaken, bruised and, like her cat, sporting a small cut on her head, but alive. The first to go over the falls on purpose and survive, though she was in no rush to repeat her feat, stating, "If it was with my dying breath, I would caution anyone against attempting the feat. I would sooner walk up to the mouth of a cannon knowing it was going to blow me to pieces than make another trip over the fall." Despite her warning, many others would make the journey over into the abyss, planned or otherwise. The next time someone went over the falls, it wasn't part of an elaborate stunt. Ed Delahanty was a professional baseball player who 2 years after Annie's stunt in July 1903 got himself thrown off the train he was on after drinking 5 drams of whiskey and threatening passengers with a straight razor. He made his way along the railway bridge that spanned the Niagara River on foot and at some point either fell or jumped into the water below. His body was found 2 weeks later with one leg severed. In 1911, Englishman Bobby Leach, who had already parachuted into the Niagara River from the upper steel arch bridge, decided he would attempt to be the first man to survive going over the falls. His mode of transport would be more industrial looking than Annie's wooden barrel, it being more of a steel cylinder with wooden bumpers at either end. Strapped into a harness inside his armoured tube, Bobby was set adrift at the mouth of Chippewa Creek and drifted towards the falls. There was early drama before reaching them, however, as his barrel struck a large rock which tore off the front bumper before travelling on and going over the falls. The gathered crowds gawped in wonder, then fell silent as they awaited news of whether he had survived, before giving a roaring cheer when it was found he had accomplished his goal of becoming the second person to make it over the falls with his life. He had made it. Not only the second person to do so, but the first man and youngest at a sprightly 54 years old. Sadly for such a daredevil, Bobby's death would come in much more mundane fashion. 15 years after his famous stunt, and Bobby was now living in New Zealand, where one day, while walking down a street in Auckland, he tripped on some discarded orange peel and broke his leg. Infection set in, and during an operation to remove the leg, Bobby passed away. His and Annie's daring stunts would lead to many others trying their hand at the feat, and not all would taste success. Those to have tried but sadly failed include Charles Stevens, who was known as the Demon Barber of Bedminster. He was another Englishman, this time from Bristol. Both Bobby Leach and daredevil William Redhill advised him to test his barrel before going over, but he refused. In his barrel, he would be using an anvil for ballast, strapping himself to the vessel and his feet to the said anvil. You can probably guess what happened next. Upon hitting the water, the anvil smashed through the wooden barrel and sank to the bottom, along with most of Charles. Only his right arm was recovered, still strapped inside his vessel. George Stathakis was the next to try his luck and fail. After initially surviving the trip over, his barrel became trapped behind one of the falls. He had enough air inside to last 8 hours, but it would be over 18 hours before the barrel was recovered. He had company inside for his final moments, as he had taken his pet tortoise with him, thought to be over 150 years old. The tortoise survived. William Redhill Jr., son of the daredevil that warned Charles Stevens about his attempt, decided to give it a go himself in 1951. He was killed when his barrel was obliterated on impact at the bottom of the falls. His death causing a change in attitudes towards those trying to accomplish the stunt, leading to further attempts being banned. This kept the stunters at bay for 10 years until 1961, when New Yorker Nathan Boyer went over the falls in a 6-foot orb made from metal and rubber, nicknamed the Plungosphere. He survived and became the first African American to complete the stunt, though he was promptly arrested. There was a spate of law-breaking stuntmen in the 1980s, as the decade saw 5 people attempt and succeed in going over the falls and surviving. The money they made from the ensuing publicity more than covering the $500 fine they would receive. With 5 people on the trot surviving the falls, perhaps people had started to become a bit blasé about the risks involved. In 1990, Jesse Sharp attempted to go over in just a canoe. He was so confident that he had booked a table at a restaurant 4 miles down from the falls, where he would continue paddling down to after his dive over the falls. He had decided not to wear a life jacket in case it hindered an escape if he got trapped beneath the falls, and also no helmet, so the cameras could capture his best side. His body was never recovered. 2 of the people that had survived attempts in the 1980s, David Mundy and Steve Trotter, would make it 2 for 2 in the 90s, with Trotter going over in a double barrel made from 2 heater tanks welded together. He was joined inside by Laurie Martin, with both surviving, though the fine of some $14,700 was a tad more than the one he received a decade earlier. In 2003, Kirk Jones became the first person to survive a trip over the falls unaided. The story goes that he and his friends had been drinking and had planned to film the stunt, though his friends couldn't work the camcorder, so no footage exists. Jones claimed that his trip over the falls was actually a suicide attempt, but this didn't stop authorities fining him $2,300 and permanently banning him from entering Canada. 14 years later, undeterred, he returned, this time to the American side of the falls with an inflatable ball for protection. He may have failed in his suicide attempt but succeeded in pulling off an impressive stunt last time, but this time out, he failed an impressive stunt but succeeded with a suicide. The ball was picked up by the Maid of the Mist, and his body was later found near Lake Ontario. At the time of this video going live, Kirk was the last known person to go over the falls as part of a stunt. But what became of the first to brave the falls for money? Well, Annie did manage to secure some funds from her venture, but perhaps not as much as she would have hoped. She would earn money speaking of her experience, but she suffered a setback when her manager ran off with her barrel, with her spending much of her savings hiring private detectives to find it. It eventually turned up in Chicago. She spent her final years posing with tourists at her souvenir stand, attempting to make money on the stock exchange and flirting with the idea of taking a second trip over the falls, though she never would. She also tried her hand working as a medium, writing a novel and providing magnetic therapy treatments before passing away in 1921 at the age of 82. She may not have made enough to have lived as comfortably as she would have liked in her later years, but the stunt she attempted out of desperation has secured her a place in history and, for better or worse, has inspired many to give it a go for themselves. And for that we say, hats off to you, Annie. Though we'd encourage anyone thinking of trying it to maybe think twice. And if you've been feeling low, remember, it's never as dark as it seems, and there is always someone you can talk to, someone who will listen and someone who will help. With that, I'd like to thank you for watching and for subscribing. There's still time to do that if you haven't already. Right then, take care, and I'll see you in the next one.